Most people imagine betrayal as some dramatic explosion, yelling, door slamming, family screaming across living rooms. But real betrayal usually arrives quietly. It sits beside you at dinner, refills your coffee, calls you dad in a soft voice, while slowly trying to take pieces of your life away. And the dangerous part is, by the time you finally recognize it, it's already been happening for a while. My name is Richard Holloway. I'm 67 years old, retired, widowed, and 3 months ago, my own son tried convincing a doctor I was mentally unfit to manage my money. The worst part. For about 10 minutes, I almost believed him, because when someone you love repeats something calmly enough, confidently enough, a small part of you starts wondering whether they might be right. That's what scared me most. Not the greed, not the lies, the doubt. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Stories. Get comfortable, because this story nearly cost me my house, my savings, and the last bit of trust I still had left in my family. My wife Eleanor passed away 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Fast. Cruel. The kind that steals a person in pieces. 41 years together. And suddenly I was eating dinner alone, in a silent house, trying to remember what normal life used to feel like. People love saying grief gets easier. Those people have clearly never watched television alone after spending 4 decades beside the same person on the couch. Grief doesn't disappear. You just learn how to carry it, without collapsing in grocery store parking lots. After Eleanor died, my son Daniel started visiting more often. At first, I appreciated it. Honestly, I did. He brought groceries, fixed a leaking faucet, helped organize paperwork. Sometimes he'd sit at the kitchen table, drinking coffee with me while talking about work. For a while, I actually thought maybe losing his mother had changed him, matured him. I even told my best friend Arthur that one afternoon. Arthur laughed so hard, coffee nearly came out his nose. "Richard," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Daniel only shows up when there's something in it for Daniel." I defended my son immediately, because fathers are talented liars when it comes to their children. We rewrite history constantly. We excuse selfishness, ignore warning signs, pretend disappointment is just a phase, even when the evidence is standing directly in front of us, wearing expensive shoes and fake concern. Arthur had known Daniel since the boy was 8. And unlike me, Arthur wasn't blinded by love. See, Daniel had always possessed a certain kind of charm. The dangerous kind. The kind that made teachers forgive missed homework, and neighbors trust him with spare house keys. He knew how to sound sincere, how to tilt his head slightly while listening, how to make people feel important long enough to get what he wanted. As a kid, it looked harmless. As an adult, it became something else entirely. Still, he was my son. And after Eleanor died, I wanted to believe family still meant something. That illusion lasted about 6 months. The first truly strange moment happened on a Thursday morning. Daniel insisted on driving me to a doctor's appointment. Now listen carefully. My son hates inconvenience with a level of passion usually reserved for tax audits and airport security. This is a man who once mailed his mother a birthday card from 3 blocks away because he didn't want to look for parking. So when he volunteered to spend an entire afternoon helping me, alarm bells should have started ringing loud enough to wake the neighborhood. Instead, I thanked him. That still embarrasses me. The appointment began normally enough. Blood pressure, medication review, routine memory questions. Then the doctor glanced down at his clipboard and asked, "Mr. Holloway, have you experienced any difficulty managing your finances lately?" I frowned. No. Before I could continue, Daniel leaned forward in his chair. "Well, there have been a few incidents. Incidents. Interesting word. Makes forgetting where you left your reading glasses sound like federal fraud." I turned slowly toward him. Daniel gave me a sad little smile. The kind people rehearse before funerals. "Dad forgot to pay the electric bill twice last month," he explained gently. Lie. Complete lie. And suddenly, something cold settled in my stomach. The appointment wasn't for me. It was about me. I watched the doctor start making notes. Daniel kept talking. Memory concerns. Confusion. Safety. Living arrangements. Every sentence sounded carefully prepared, like he'd practiced this conversation beforehand. Then came the moment that changed everything. Daniel sighed heavily and said, "I just don't think Dad should be living alone anymore." There it was. The real reason we were sitting in that office. Not concern. Control. And the worst part? He sounded convincing. For a brief moment, I actually questioned myself. I was 67. I had forgotten small things recently. Names. Appointments. Where I put my car keys. That's what betrayal does. It uses your existing fears against you. The doctor looked at me carefully. "Mr. Holloway, how do you feel about what your son is saying?" I looked at Daniel, and for the first time in my life, I realized my son was studying me the same way businessmen study contracts. Calculating, waiting, measuring reactions. That realization hurt more than the lies. I feel fine, I answered. Daniel smiled sadly. Again, Dad says that every time we try discussing help, another dangerous word. People trying to take your independence always call it help first. The appointment ended with the doctor recommending further evaluation. Daniel looked relieved. That terrified me, because relief means expectation, and expectations mean plans already exist. The drive home was painfully quiet. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, acting thoughtful, concerned, the perfect son. Meanwhile, my brain replayed dozens of moments I'd ignored over the last year. His wife Karen, asking whether the house was fully paid off. Daniel insisting I should simplify my finances. Missing paperwork from my office drawer. Questions about my will, disguised as casual conversation. At the time, each moment felt small, harmless. Together, they formed a roadmap leading directly toward my bank account. When we pulled into my driveway, Daniel turned off the engine and looked at me carefully. "Dad," he said softly, "you know we only want what's best for you. Whenever someone says that sentence while discussing your money, hold on to your wallet." I nodded slowly. "You're right." The relief on his face arrived too quickly, too eagerly. That was the moment I knew for certain. My son thought he was winning. What Daniel didn't know was that Eleanor had spent 30 years preparing for people exactly like him. My wife trusted almost nobody completely, especially family. Smart woman. That night, after Daniel left, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at Eleanor's empty chair, and slowly, memories started resurfacing. Conversations, warnings, small comments I never took seriously enough. About 5 years before she died, Eleanor made me promise something. "If anything ever feels wrong," she said one night while organizing paperwork, "don't ignore your instincts just because someone shares your last name." At the time, I laughed. Now, that sentence felt less like advice and more like prophecy. I got up from the table and walked into the study. Inside the bottom drawer of Eleanor's old filing cabinet sat a navy blue folder labeled, "Just in case." My hands actually shook, opening it. Inside were legal documents, trust agreements, property records, letters, and one handwritten note in Eleanor's careful script. "Richard, if you're opening this, it means your instincts finally caught up with your heart." I sat down immediately, because suddenly, I understood. Eleanor had seen this coming long before I did. Years earlier, after Daniel borrowed money he conveniently forgot to repay, Eleanor quietly met with our attorney. Together, they restructured nearly everything. The house, savings, investments. Technically, very little still belonged directly to me. Most assets sat protected inside a trust controlled by strict legal instructions Eleanor created personally. And those instructions contained one very specific condition. If anyone attempted to challenge my competency for financial gain, that person would immediately lose all inheritance rights. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my wife had apparently been 10 steps ahead of everyone for decades. Daniel thought he was setting a trap. What he actually did was trigger Eleanor's. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Arthur. His response, after hearing everything, "Well," he said calmly, "your son's an idiot." "Arthur. What? You want me to lie at my age?" Fair point. The second call was to my attorney, Benjamin Lewis. Benjamin had worked with Eleanor for years, and judging by the complete lack of surprise in his voice, he'd been expecting this possibility eventually. "I assume Daniel pushed for medical evaluation?" he asked. "Yes." Benjamin sighed. "Your wife predicted that, almost exactly." That sentence sent chills down my spine. Then came the third phone call, the important one. I contacted a private investigator Eleanor had apparently hired once before during Daniel's gambling phase in his 30s. Yes, gambling phase. Amazing what children conveniently forget once they start calling themselves financially responsible adults. Within 4 days, new information started arriving. Credit card debt, late mortgage payments, business investment losses. Daniel wasn't trying to help me. He was drowning. And drowning people grab whatever floats. Even their parents. The deeper we looked, the uglier things became. Karen's online shopping debts. A failed restaurant investment Daniel never mentioned. Multiple personal loans. They weren't planning for my future. They were planning for theirs. About a week later, Daniel invited himself over for dinner. Homemade lasagna. Wine. Extra friendliness. That alone told me he wanted something. Daniel sat across from me, smiling carefully, while Karen complimented the house every 7 minutes, like a real estate agent trying too hard. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "Dad, we've been thinking more about the evaluation." "Of course you have." I nodded quietly. Daniel leaned forward. There are some really wonderful assisted living communities nearby. Communities? Interesting how quickly people stop calling your home a home once they want it. Karen jumped in immediately. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance anymore. Maintenance. Apparently 40 years of handling mortgages, taxes, repairs, and life itself suddenly becomes impossible at 6. I let them talk. Sometimes greedy people expose themselves faster when nobody interrupts. Daniel explained financial management, safety, long-term planning. Then finally he said, if we handled things now, it would avoid complications later. There it was. Not grief, not concern, administration. My entire life reduced to paperwork waiting for signatures. I stood slowly. Daniel stopped talking. So, I said calmly, you believe I'm mentally incapable of managing my own affairs? Karen immediately looked uncomfortable. Good. Daniel tried softening his tone. That's not what I'm saying. Yes, it is. Silence. Then I walked into the study and returned carrying the navy blue folder. I placed it carefully on the kitchen table. Your mother prepared this years ago, I said. Daniel frowned. What is it? Consequences. That got his attention. I opened the folder slowly. Then I explained everything. The trust, the legal protections, the inheritance clause, and finally the part that drained all color from his face. If anyone attempts to challenge my mental competency for financial access, I read aloud, that individual immediately forfeits all claims to the estate. Karen actually stopped breathing for a second. Daniel stared at me. That's insane, I replied quietly. That's preparation. He looked furious. Then panicked. Then embarrassed. Amazing how quickly greed turns into victimhood. Once consequences appear, you think I'm trying to steal from you? He snapped. I looked directly at him. I think you walked into a doctor's office and lied about your father's mental health. Silence. Heavy silence. Karen suddenly became fascinated with her wine glass. Daniel stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. No, I said calmly. What's unbelievable is that your mother predicted this exact situation years before it happened. That hurt him. I could see it. Because deep down, Daniel knew Eleanor had understood him better than I ever wanted to. Before leaving, he turned toward me. You're choosing money over family. That almost made me laugh. No, son, I said quietly. You chose money over family the moment you tried convincing strangers I couldn't take care of myself. He left without another word. Karen followed silently behind him. And for the first time in months, the house felt peaceful again. Not because I'd won, because the pretending was finally over. A few weeks later, Benjamin officially removed Daniel from every inheritance document connected to the trust. Legally. Permanently. Arthur celebrated by bringing over expensive bourbon and saying, well, your wife remains the smartest person either of us ever met. True again. I still miss Eleanor every day. Still talk to her sometimes while watering the garden. But now, when I sit alone in the quiet house she protected so carefully, I understand something important. Love without boundaries becomes permission. And some people, even your own children, will take everything you allow them to. The hardest lesson of old age isn't learning who loves you. It's learning who loves access to you. There's a difference. And thanks to Eleanor, I learned it before it was too late. But the story didn't end there. In fact, the real damage hadn't even started yet. Because greed rarely disappears quietly once money gets involved. About 2 weeks after Daniel stormed out of my house, he stopped calling entirely. No messages, no apologies, no attempts to explain himself. At first I told myself maybe that was for the best. I spent my mornings gardening, afternoons reading, evenings sitting on the back porch, listening to old jazz records Eleanor loved. For a little while, life felt calm again. Then Arthur called me one Tuesday morning. Richard, he said carefully, don't panic. But I think your son is telling people you have dementia. I went very still. What? Arthur sighed. My cousin saw Daniel at a charity event Saturday night. Apparently he's been talking about how difficult things have become with your health. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because suddenly, I understood something ugly. Daniel wasn't trying to convince me anymore. He was building a narrative. And narratives are dangerous, especially once enough people repeat them. Over the next few days, small things started happening. A neighbor asked whether I should still be driving. My bank manager called asking if I wanted assistance managing accounts. Even my pharmacist gently asked whether Daniel should be added as a medical contact. At first, I couldn't understand how things spread so quickly. Then Benjamin explained. People trust family members, he said quietly, especially concerned sons. Concerned. There was that word again. Funny how dangerous words sound harmless when spoken softly. That Friday evening, I sat in my living room, staring at Eleanor's old photograph above the fireplace. And honestly, for the first time since she died, I felt truly alone. Not lonely. Alone. There's a difference. Lonely means missing people. Alone means realizing some people were never really with you to begin with. Around 8 o'clock, my doorbell rang. It was my neighbor Helen, 72 years old, sharp as broken glass, retired school principal, the type of woman who notices everything. She stepped inside, holding a casserole. I brought lasagna, she announced. Arthur already brought bourbon yesterday. Excellent, she said. Then tonight, we combined poor decisions. That made me laugh harder than I expected. We sat in the kitchen eating while rain tapped softly against the windows. Eventually, Helen looked at me carefully. You look tired. I hesitated, then told her everything. The doctor, the lies, the trust, all of it. Helen listened quietly, without interrupting once. When I finished, she set down her fork. Your son underestimated something, she said. What? Old people talk. I frowned. That's your wisdom? No, she replied calmly. My wisdom is this. Men like Daniel believe aging makes people invisible. They forget. Older people spend decades building relationships that stayed with me. Because she was right. I'd spent 40 years in that community. Church events, neighborhood cookouts, volunteer work. People knew me, really knew me, and suddenly I understood something important. Daniel was relying on isolation. He assumed grief had weakened me enough to make me easy to control. What he forgot was that Eleanor and I spent decades building a life surrounded by people who paid attention. The next morning, I started making calls. Not angry calls, not defensive calls, conversations. Coffee with neighbors, lunch with old coworkers. A Veterans Association meeting I hadn't attended in months. And slowly, the fog Daniel created started disappearing, because real reputation takes years to destroy. Then came the second betrayal, and somehow, this one hurt worse. Benjamin called me early Monday morning. Richard, he said carefully, Daniel filed a petition. My stomach tightened. What kind of petition? A pause. He's requesting temporary financial guardianship. For a few seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Guardianship. My own son was legally asking the court to declare me incapable of controlling my own life. Benjamin continued. He submitted statements describing cognitive decline. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor used to clip coupons and drink tea every morning. Suddenly the room felt smaller. What happens now? I asked. Benjamin's voice hardened. Now we stop being polite. That hearing took place 3 weeks later, and I will never forget walking into that courtroom. Daniel sat beside his attorney, wearing a navy suit and an expression of rehearsed sadness. Karen sat behind him. Neither of them could look directly at me for very long. Good, because shame should feel uncomfortable. The judge was an older woman named Margaret Ellis. Sharp eyes, no patience for nonsense. I liked her immediately. Daniel's attorney spoke first. He described concerning behavioral changes, memory issues, confusion, isolation. Listening to someone summarize your life like a medical problem is an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. Then Daniel testified, and watching my son lie under oath felt strangely surreal. Not dramatic, just deeply sad. He talked about missed appointments, repeated stories, forgotten bills, half-truths, mixed carefully with fiction. That's what skilled manipulators do. Complete lies are risky. Partial truths sound believable. Then the judge asked him a simple question. Mr. Holloway, what exactly are you requesting? Daniel cleared his throat. I simply want authority to protect my father financially until his condition improves. Authority. Interesting choice of word. Benjamin stood slowly, and for the next 40 minutes, my attorney dismantled Daniel, piece by piece. Financial records, private investigator reports, debt statements. Then, finally, Benjamin handed the judge Eleanor's trust documents. The courtroom became very quiet, especially when the inheritance clause was read aloud. Judge Ellis removed her glasses slowly. Mr. Holloway, she said to Daniel, are you aware your mother specifically anticipated this situation years ago? Daniel looked stunned, because suddenly he understood. This wasn't just legal protection. It was proof. Proof that his own mother once worried he might eventually try something exactly like this. That realization broke something inside him. I could see it. The hearing ended quickly after that. Petition denied, immediately. But Judge Ellis wasn't finished. She looked directly at Daniel before leaving the courtroom. You should be very careful, she said coldly, not to confuse parental love with vulnerability. I still think about that sentence, because it perfectly described everything. Outside the courthouse, Daniel tried speaking to me. Dad, no. Just one word. He stopped immediately. For a moment, he looked less like a grown man and more like the little boy who once broke a neighbor's window and tried blaming the dog. I was trying to help, he whispered. No, I said quietly. You are trying to secure your future using my life. Karen touched his arm. They walked away together without another word. I wish I could tell you that was the moment everything healed. It wasn't. Real life rarely gives clean endings. Months passed. Daniel disappeared completely. No birthday call. No Thanksgiving. No Christmas. And honestly, that hurt more than the lawsuit. Because money problems can be solved. But once trust dies inside a family, something permanent changes. One snowy evening in December, I found myself sitting beside Eleanor's grave. The cemetery was silent, except for wind moving through bare trees. I failed him, I said out loud. I hadn't planned on speaking. The words just escaped. And maybe grief finally makes people honest. Because deep down, part of me wondered whether Daniel became this way because of me. Maybe I protected him too much. Maybe I confused love with rescue. Maybe Eleanor saw warning signs years before I did because she wasn't blinded by fatherhood. You didn't fail him? A voice suddenly said behind me. I nearly jumped. Arthur stood there, holding 2 coffees. You really need to stop sneaking up on old people, I muttered. You really need less dramatic cemetery visits. He sat beside me quietly. After a minute, he said something I never forgot. Richard, loving someone doesn't guarantee they'll love you correctly back. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me, because for months, I'd been treating Daniel's betrayal like a parenting failure. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe some people simply make selfish choices. And maybe parents spend too much time blaming themselves for decisions their children freely make. The following spring, life slowly started becoming normal again. I repainted the kitchen, fixed the back fence, started attending Arthur's awful poker nights, where everyone cheated openly, while pretending not to. Helen continued bringing casseroles I never asked for. And one afternoon, while planting tomatoes in Eleanor's garden, my phone rang. Daniel. First call, in almost 6 months. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hello. Silence. Then finally, Dad. His voice sounded smaller somehow, older. We talked awkwardly for several minutes about meaningless things. Weather, baseball, Arthur's bad golf game. Then eventually Daniel went quiet. I lost the house, he admitted. I closed my eyes. The debt finally caught him. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. Not polished, not strategic, just tired. And for the first time in nearly a year, he sounded honest. I convinced myself I deserved it, he admitted softly. I kept thinking after Mom died, you had enough, that eventually it would all become mine anyway. I listened, without interrupting. Then he said the sentence that hurt most. I stopped seeing you as my father. I started seeing you as an inheritance. Silence filled the line. Because what exactly do you say after hearing something like that? Finally, I answered honestly, that's the saddest thing you could have become. He started crying quietly. And hearing your grown son cry is one of the strangest pains in the world. Part of you remembers the little boy. Another part remembers the man who betrayed you. Both exist simultaneously. Before hanging up, Daniel asked carefully, do you think Mom would forgive me? I looked out across Eleanor's garden. The roses were finally blooming again. Yes, I said softly, eventually. After the call ended, I sat alone on the porch for a long time, and I realized something important. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. One can return, the other sometimes cannot. But life keeps moving anyway. That's the strange thing about surviving betrayal. Eventually, the pain stops being the center of every thought. The house feels warm again. Food tastes normal. Music stops sounding sad all the time. And one ordinary afternoon, you suddenly realize you survived something you once thought would destroy you. I still miss Eleanor every single day. Still talk to her while watering the garden. Still expect to hear her footsteps, sometimes late at night. But now, when I sit in the quiet house, she protects it so carefully. I finally understand what she was trying to teach me all those years. Love without boundaries becomes permission. And some people living your own children will take everything you allow them to. The hardest lesson of aging isn't learning who loves you. It's learning who loves access to you. There's a difference. And thanks to Eleanor, I learned it before it was too late.